Hello, listeners. If you've enjoyed these narrations, please click on that like and subscribe button. I work as a cell phone technician. You've probably seen videos on YouTube of some guy clinging to the top of a metal tower in the middle of a huge empty nothingness. Well, that's me. It's about the best job you can get where I live without a high school diploma, and really the only source of entertainment to boot. As a perpetual screw-up with an appetite for adrenaline, I was basically a star candidate. Really, the only two requirements are a basic level of physical conditioning and a complete lack of fear, both of which I have. Or at least I thought I did. That was until 2 weeks ago. The company I work for, who shall remain unnamed lest the corporation overlords find this post, sent me out to a job site about 50 miles out of town. Rarely do I have to cross state lines, but the tower in question was about as far out of the way as it gets. A big one too. 400-something odd feet, meant to bounce signals all the way across the Appalachian Mountains from one sleepy mining town to the next. That suited me just fine. I preferred working where prying eyes won't see me, mainly for one reason: base jumping. For the uninitiated, base jumping entails throwing yourself off of a big object with a parachute on. You know, when you jumped off the roof of your house as 10 years old with a blanket and broke your ankle, and then your stepdad came out and beat you with a belt before he drove you to the hospital. No? Maybe it's just me. Anyway, base jumping is basically a grown-up's version of that, minus the broken ankle and the, beating, hopefully. Lucky for me, secluded cell towers happen to be the perfect spot for this kind of hobby. The morning I was supposed to head out there was a fine mist sinking down in the hollers around where I live. The locals called it moonshine weather, which translated to stay the hell inside and get drunk instead of going to work. As tempted as I was to do just that, I'd been hoping they'd sent me out there way for months, and I couldn't pass up this opportunity. I should have trusted my gut though. Instead, I brewed myself a shitty thermos of coffee, threw my gear into the back of my shitty Jeep, and, well, you get the idea. I drove a few hours out of the site, and fooling myself all the way that the weather would clear up, and it would be sunny on my climb on the way to the top. I'd packed my parachute along with the other gear. I'd used to bring my GoPro along, until I realized that recording that sort of behavior would, well, give OSHA reps an aneurysm probably. Anyways, I parked my Jeep outside the fence along the tower and typed the code into the electric gate. Someone had strung razor wire over the top of it, but I doubted anybody was going to visit much, and the wire was actually crumbling in pieces. I figured anyone who really wanted to wouldn't find a hard way to bypass it. My suspicions were confirmed as I drove past the tiny maintenance shed sitting outside in the corner of the lot, and found every inch of corroded metal covering in graffiti. I admired it as I opened my padlock and retrieved one of the bulbs from inside. The work order said that this tower needed an aircraft warning light replaced. You know, those blinking red lights that let you know that there's a giant tower out there in the dark. I took one from the dusty shelf and tucked it into my rucksack, threw on my climbing gear, checked my chute one last time, and started the climb. The start of the climb is always boring, one hand over the other, rung by rung. You're almost impatiently waiting for that thrill that comes with dangling hundreds of feet above the earth. Well, at least I was. But you have to pace yourself. A fall from 30 feet can be just as fatal as a fall from 400, and if I was going to go out, I knew which one I'd prefer to take. Most of the time, you'll see tower climbers clipping a carabiner to each rung to fasten themselves to a place as they go. I don't bother with that unless it's a particularly windy day. It wasn't. In fact, the air seemed unnaturally still as I climbed. If I were a wiser man, I might have paid more attention to the prickling on the back of my neck, or the sense of foreboding in my gut. But as you probably guessed, I'm not. So I didn't. Instead, I chalked it up to coffee jitters and doubled my pace. Probably just need to take a leak. Have you ever pissed off of a 400 tall object? It's just as awesome as it sounds. I was around halfway up when I realized that the fog around me had grown more dense rather than less, which was pretty strange. Usually when you get a bit of height, the sun starts to burn away the mist and you can see just fine. Typically, it's all but gone by 2 p.m., leaving you free and clear to jump from the top. I'd already picked out a nice little meadow to the southeast of the tower where I could land and have an easy hike back to the Jeep. If I couldn't see it though, that would be a problem. I'm not suicidal after all. It looked like my dreams were shattered for the day. The fog around me was so dense that if I hadn't known better, I would have thought that a storm was rolling in. But the weather forecast hadn't mentioned any chance of storm, and there was still no wind. It was strangely silent, except for the dull ring of my boots and the rung of my own carabiners. I paused to take a breath, and around halfway up there was an altitude marker painted on the cell tower so you knew where you were, and I had just passed 150 feet. Clipping a carabiner onto the rung above me for the first time that day, I leaned back and stretched, enjoying the feeling of weightlessness. I glanced down, something the veteran climbers tell you to never do, and that's when I saw it. Down below me, shrouded in mist, a shape clung to the side of the tower. I say shape because I couldn't get a clear look at it. Just a shadow, maybe about 100 feet below. So far, I couldn't even really tell if it was moving. The fuck is that? Now I know I'm not Shakespeare, but I doubted old Bill had any more reaction and any different than I did. I mean, why would anybody be climbing a cell tower in the backwoods of the Appalachians? On a day like this especially. My first thought was it was one of the graffiti artists who, finding their skills limited by the canvas of the old maintenance shed, had actually grown some balls to climb the tower and add a little color to the gray steel. Good on them. Might make for a bit of an awkward meeting when they catch up to me, but I wasn't about to call the cops or anything. I even debated hanging around until they got a little closer, but I decided against that. That was my first and only good decision that day. Probably the one that actually saved my life. I kept climbing, reasoning that if my fellow climber made it to the top while I was still around, I'd congratulate them on their courage and ask them nicely to paint over one of the lights so that the company would send me out here in about a month or two, and I could get my jump on. I reached the 200-foot mark and took another break, feeling the cool wet air on my cheek, scratching under my thick beanie. The company tells you to wear a helmet, but I figured that at this height, it doesn't really matter that your cranium being liquid is gonna help with the helmet. I took another look down to see how my mysterious friend was doing. It was closer. I specify it because it took my brain a few seconds to register that the thing climbing up the tower towards me, it wasn't human. It had closed the distance between us by a few dozen feet, and it was impossible to mistake. Its arms, they were too long, its body too short. I caught a glimpse of a dark, glistening skin through the mist, and a face twisted on a knotted neck, 2 eyes that were as pale and milk white like an old man's cataracts. I blinked twice just to make sure that I wasn't seeing it. It was still there. One long arm swung over the other with an unnatural grace. A hand large enough to swallow the entire rung curling around steel. What the fuck is that? Once more, and with feeling. Now I'm not superstitious or religious, or even philosophical, or politic. Really anything at all. I'm just a monkey-brained tower climber. And when I saw that thing that was following me up the tower, my monkey brain took right off. I scurried up the rungs, throwing caution to the wind, my brain trying to account for what I was seeing. Some kind of prank? A TV show, right? With an absolutely insane budget, it has to be. A dozen half-hearted attempts to reason flew through my mind, each one as pathetic as the last. I climbed until I was out of breath, and my mind, looking for excuses and coming up empty, swung back around to the, did I really see that? I risked one last glance down. That thing, it was still below me, and gaining. It climbed in eerie silence, not growling or snarling like a wild animal, just quiet, fluid determination of a predator stalking its prey. I caught a flash of movement, of a stub-nosed face, of a naked skin and a mouth full of black teeth. I'd given an old meth head some chance once, and she flashed me a rotten grin full of teeth like that. There was only one way down now, and that was up. I climbed as quickly as I could, throwing caution to the wind, the 300-foot mark passing in a blur. 350. I was starting to flag, every breath burning in my lung. I could taste copper in my mouth, and my eyes were blurry. I started to get clumsy. That's when I missed a rung with my foot, almost falling. I clung there, terrified that I would feel long fingers close around my foot. I kicked the rung once and then managed to get my boots back in place and kept going. I reached the tower's upmost platform, the trap door. It was fucking locked, secured by a padlock. Of course it was locked. I tore a glove off with my teeth and let it spiral away, fumbling in my pocket to find the key. Nothing. Nothing. Where's the key? My entire body was seized with fear. The piss that I had been saving for the top of the tower was now running down my leg. I unhooked the hammer on my tool belt and bashed away at the padlock, hitting it over and over. It finally came open, bouncing off of my arm. I shoved open the door and hauled myself through, landing on the small platform at the top like a trout from a creek. Through the grate I could see the thing was right below me. It's opening its mouth, jaws cracking to reveal a mouth that was too wide. And inside that mouth was another mouth, and another, and another. I screamed. Well, I did my best with whatever air was left in my lungs. It sounded more like a whimper or a sob, to be honest. I stood with my back to the top of the tower, watching as it moved half hidden below me. I slung one leg over the railing of the edge, checked my straps on my parachute, and the sky was still gray in every direction. Nothing but endless, mind-numbing gray. Looking back, I feel as though I should have at least had some idea of where the sun was, but there was nothing. Just an endless field of twilight. I couldn't tell which direction I was facing, or even where the meadow I'd planned to land in would be. I'd be jumping blind, into the fog, no idea where I was heading or even how close I was to the earth. It was insanity. It was my only option, though. As the creature lifted one glistening arm over the edge of the tower, ready to haul himself up and grab me, I threw myself off. Normally, this is where I would let out a whoop, reveling in the feeling of the wind on my face, the weightlessness. This time, though, I fell in silence, eyes full of freezing tears as the cold wind scored past my hair and skin. I had a pair of goggles slung around my neck to shield my face, but in the midst of all that, I'd forgotten to put them on. I seized the ripcord and pulled for all I was worth. There was a reassuring snag of nylon against the air, followed by a bowel-loosening tug, and my feet were kicked out in front of me. Thankfully, instinct took over, giving my overtaxed brain a break. I glanced up and over my shoulder, wind whistling in my ears, but I could see no sign of the creature above me. I pulled on the steering line, straining to see any sign of the ground below. There was nothing. A few long moments passed, and then I caught sight of the trees spearing through the mist. Another followed, and then another, and then I was sailing between them, branches slapping my face, battering my arms and legs. I flew free of the trees and straight into the side of the fence at the base of the tower. Razor wire slashing my hands as I struck the top of the fence with enough force to knock the wind out of me. I fell backwards, landing in the dirt, shredding nylon, billowing down, to cover my face. I shrugged free from the remains of my chute and unbuckled the pack, leaving it all in the heap by the fence. I got to my feet and leaped in my Jeep. Above, I could see no sign of the creature. I hauled the door open and started the engine, praying that the faulty spark plug I'd been meaning to replace for months would just do me this one last solid. The engine sputtered to life, and that's when something flew overhead. A blur. I caught sight of a long limb spread wide, of membranes, wings billowing in the sky. Eyes locked onto mine as the predator glides silently overhead, banking, turning towards me. I threw the Jeep in reverse, tires spinning in loose dirt. My head bounced off of the headrest as I crashed through the gate, and then I was off, jostling down the gravel-packed road. I didn't even stop driving until I'd reached home. Autopilot must have kicked in because I then drove myself to the ER. They must have thought I was some kind of crazy person, eyes wide, panting, soaked with piss. They had to peel my fingers from the bloody steering wheel before they could even get me inside. It's been 2 weeks now, and the stitches across my arms and hands are just now healing. I'll have the scars for the rest of my life. I'm writing this with the doors locked, on my stepdad's old 12-gauge leaned against the desk next to me. I should get a dog, maybe 2. The mist is back, and somehow the mountains just don't seem as safe as they used to be. The screen on my phone just lit up. A text from the company. Another job, another site. I don't think I'll answer.